Okay, hi everybody. My name is Cora. I'm with Save the Manatee Club, and I see we have a lot of people tuning in here today. So I want to give some shout outs to some of the countries. We have people here from Mexico, from Argentina, Hungary, Canada, Spain, Serbia, Morocco, the United States. So lots and lots of people. I probably forgot some of the countries, but we see we have lots of people tuning in, all ready to learn about manatees. So this is awesome. So I'm Cora. I'm with Save the Manatee Club here in Florida in the United States. I've been with Save the Manatee for about 7 years now, and as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Florida. I grew up in Germany and joined the Save the Manatee Club back in 2014. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to spread the word about manatees through public education outreach, research, and we also help with the rescue, rehabilitation, and release of manatees. So during today's presentation, I want to give you all some general manatee information. What is a manatee? What do they eat? Where do they live? How do they care for their young? And then I want to talk a little bit about the problems that manatees face today. And then I'm going to be taking questions at the very end. So you can post your questions here in our chat throughout the presentation. And my awesome coworker, Ali, is going to go through the questions and I will be able to answer them at the very end of the presentation. All right, so without further ado, we are going to start with all about manatees. And I have a slideshow that we are going to share so you can all see that. Here we go. Let me see if it's working. Yeah, can you see it? Okay. All right, perfect. How do I go through this? All right, so there are different types of manatees around the world. Manatees belong to the order of Sirenia. And as you can see in this slide over here, the manatee that we see in the right-hand corner is called the West Indian manatee. So for all of those of you who have been to Florida, maybe, this is most likely the manatee that you would be seeing here. Then we also have the West African manatee, which, as the name says, it lives in West Africa. The Amazonian manatee, which that lives in the freshwater river. And a cousin species called the dugong. So the dugong looks a little bit different than the manatee. It has sort of a dolphin-shaped tail, whereas all the manatees have like a beaver-shaped tail. And the dugong lives in the Indo-Pacific and around Australia and South Africa. Now, the big guy on the bottom of the slide here is called the Steller sea cow. Unfortunately, the Steller sea cow went extinct just 27 years after its discovery. So unfortunately, that manatee, that species of the order of Sirenia is no longer around, but the other ones still are. So manatees are a threatened species. They are right now protected under the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, as well as the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act. They were actually downlisted in 2017 by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, so they're no longer considered endangered, they are considered threatened. But that decision is questionable because although manatee numbers have really grown since researchers first started counting them, so have the threats that manatees are facing. And it's really important to remember that manatees were actually never put on the endangered list because of very low numbers. They were put on the list because of all the threats that they're facing. And a little bit later in the presentation, we'll go over some of those threats and what people can do to help manatees. So the last count around Florida, which researchers usually try to do about once a year, counted somewhere around 6,000 manatees. That seems like a pretty good number, but this year we've already lost 458 manatees. So if you're looking at losing so many in just one given year, you know, those 6,000 manatees suddenly don't really seem all that many manatees anymore. So manatee size, how big do these guys get? The average adult manatee is about 10 feet long, and it does weigh between 800 and 1,200 pounds usually. Now, the largest manatee that was ever recorded actually was over 13 feet long, and it weighed over 3,000 pounds, almost 3,500 pounds. And now, what do you think? Who's going to get bigger, the boys or the girls? Well, it's actually the female manatees that do get bigger than the male manatees. Usually, animals, the males will get bigger than the females. In manatees, it's the other way around. And I'm going to tell you why in just a couple of slides. So the closest living relative to the manatee is actually the elephant. You may think it's the walrus, a seal, or dolphin, but the only thing that they have in common with those animals is that they're all aquatic animals. Now, if you're looking at the manatee and the elephant, there's actually a lot of similarities. So one other thing is the long lifespan. Both manatees and elephants can actually reach over 60 years of age. They both have very small eyes. And if you look really closely, they have little flipper nails, just like the toenails on an elephant. Their vision isn't all that good, but their sense of hearing and their sense of touch is very, very developed. Now, if you look closely at a manatee, they actually have really tiny hairs all over their body as well as on their snout. We call them vibrissae. It's very similar to the whiskers of a dog or a cat. And they're really, really sensitive. So each little hair is actually connected to a nerve ending in the brain. So researchers believe that manatees actually use these tiny little hairs to feel around in the water to detect fresh water, warm water, certain currents. So they're actually using their hair as a sensory organ. Another thing they have in common with the elephant is what we call a prehensile snout. So if you are picturing an elephant picking up a piece of hay or a peanut or something like that, that's exactly the same way that a manatee's snout works when it's picking up the vegetation that they're eating. They also have what we call marching molars. So manatees do have teeth, but they don't have any sharp teeth in the front. They only have molars that are in the back of their jaw, and those molars are actually replacing themselves. So manatees eat a lot of vegetation, and sometimes they pick up little sands or little pieces of rock. So the teeth in the front will wear down and fall out. And then they regrow new teeth in the back of the jaw that march forward. It's almost like a conveyor belt. So manatees actually, just like the elephant, replaces its teeth throughout their lives. So they don't ever have to see the dentist, which is pretty cool. So manatees are found in tropical and subtropical waters. Their range is usually around Florida and the surrounding states, but we do have some adventurous manatees that go away from Florida up the East Coast and have been seen as far north as Rhode Island or even Massachusetts. Not very common, but it does happen. Now, they're not restricted to a specific type of water. They can actually live in salt, fresh, and brackish water, and they can go in between those waterways as well. The only requirement that they need is they have to be in water above 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 22 degrees Celsius. If the the water temperature drops below those temperatures, manatees really need to find warm water sources. So you may think that manatees look really big and fat and blubbery. They only have about an inch or about maybe 2 centimeters of fat layer. So in the winter time, manatees have a really, really hard time staying warm. So what do? Manatees migrate to warm water sources. So those can be warm water springs, as you can see in the slide over here on the right-hand side, or the warm water outflow of industrial power plants. They're putting out warm water and that's attracting the manatees. So if you ever come to Florida in the winter time and you're going to a warm water spring or power plant, you can see up to 500 or 600 manatees in a big aggregation right there. So pretty cool, something to keep in mind. So what do manatees eat? Manatees are vegetarians, so they actually only eat plants. They can consume up to 10% of their own body weight in a single day. However, in the winter time, when they're staying at these warm water aggregation sites, they can actually sometimes go for a couple of days or even a week without feeding, just to stay warm. They eat all types of vegetation. Some of their favorite food are seagrasses. They also eat floating vegetation, for example, water lettuce, water hyacinth. They eat hydrilla, some invasives. So not really all that picky. If a tree, for example, falls into the water, you may even see them eating some of the leaves from the tree. So do manatees make any audible sounds? That's something we get asked very often. Yes, they absolutely do. They actually communicate by making little squeaks, chirps, and squeals. almost sounds like a squeaky floorboard or a squeaky door. They can also hear very well, but they hear at higher frequencies than we do. So I'm going to try to play you a little sound file here where you will actually hear the manatees squeaking. So this is a mother and a calf communicating with each other. So it's really funny to think that an animal this large, they can get up to 1,200 or even 2,000 pounds. By the way, that's about 600 to 800 kilograms, that it can make these really high-pitched, tiny sounds. You wouldn't really expect that, right? So a lot of people ask me, how long can a manatee stay underwater? Manatees are mammals, so they need to breathe air. They're not fish, they don't have gills, so they cannot breathe underwater. They can hold their breath for up to 20 minutes when they're resting or sleeping. Researchers believe, though, that when they come up to the surface to take a breath of air, they don't necessarily fully wake up. When they're active, they usually breathe about every 3 to 5 minutes. A manatee that is breathing about every 30 seconds, this is actually a sign that it may be in distress. So if you do come across a manatee and you think that it's acting kind of weird, what usually researchers ask you to do is monitor its respiration rate. And if you're seeing that manatee is not very active, but it's breathing about every 30 seconds or every 45 seconds, that's a really good indication that something may be wrong with that animal. So I talked a little bit earlier about female manatees getting bigger than the males, and why is that? That is because females have the babies, they have calves. That's what we call a baby manatee, it's a calf. They usually start reproducing at around the age of 3 to 4 and can usually have a calf about every 2 to 5 years. Manatees get together in what we call a mating herd. You can see that in the picture on the bottom here. So it's a large group of males that come together to pursue a single female, and after mating is finished, the female will go off on her own and is actually going to care for her baby on her own. So the male is not involved in caring for the calf. Manatees don't usually form a family unit like we know it from other animals. And they don't really live in herds or pods either. They're pretty solitary animals, so it's just a long-lasting bond is between the mother and her calf. Manatees are pregnant for about 13 months, so it's a little over a year, and then they give birth to usually one calf. They can have twins, but that is pretty rare. It's usually just one calf at a time. And they usually weigh about 60 to 70 pounds at birth when the calf is first born. So as you can see here in the picture, it looks really, really tiny next to the big mom, but this manatee is already about 60 to 70 pounds, so pretty big baby. So I just wanted to include a little bit information about how do researchers keep track of a manatee. Some manatees are outfitted with a satellite tracking device, which you can see in those pictures here. It's a device that goes, there's a belt that goes around the manatee's tail, just where the tail meets the body. And attached to that belt is a tether and a satellite tag that is floating on top of the water. So this equipment includes a whole bunch of things like a VHF, a sonic, a satellite transmitter, all those things that give researchers information about the manatee. And the equipment is designed to come off if it gets entangled. So it has weak links embedded both in the belt as well as in that tether. That's a long line that you see that connects the satellite track on the surface to the tail. And that can all break apart, so there's no danger that the manatee may get entangled in something by wearing this device. And this lets researchers know where a manatee is, how it's behaving, if it's finding good food sources, traveling routes, all those kind of things. So manatees, which is really interesting, actually have no natural predators. Like I said earlier, they were just downlisted from the endangered to the threatened status. They have no other animals that are bothering them. They coexist very peacefully with large alligators as well as with sharks. Although they sometimes live in the same habitat, there's usually no problem for the two species, which is it's a really cool thing. They don't have any other animal bothering them at all. Now, what is a problem for manatees are a lot of human-related things. So I want to point out a few of them. Number one is collision with watercraft. It is the largest known cause of human-related manatee mortality. So basically, almost every manatee that you see in Florida has scars on it from some sort of collision with a motorboat. If you're looking at this manatee in the picture here, her name is actually Alice. She lives at Blue Springs State Park, where I do a lot of my research. And as you can see, she has a very large series of propeller cuts down her left side. So far this year, we have already lost 62 manatees due to watercraft. It could actually be more because of the pandemic. Not every manatee was recovered and we were not able to determine what happened to them. But in 2019, we lost over 100 manatees just to boat collisions. So that's a pretty concerning number, especially if you look at the anatomy of the manatee. What you see in that drawing here in red, these are the manatee lungs. They're very large and the rib bones are located right over the lungs. So if a manatee gets hit anywhere on its back by a boat, it can potentially break a rib and that can puncture a lung. And those kind of injuries can be very dangerous for manatees, and oftentimes they need to be rescued for those. So some of the things that we people can do to avoid that is, first of all, going slow in manatee habitat. Manatees are very, very slow moving. They only move about 3 to 5 miles an hour, not very fast. They're not a seal or dolphin that will just speed away. The manatees are very slow moving animals. So going slow and obeying these posted speed zones, that's the number one thing we can do to help them. Also, if you ever near a waterway, if you've heard of polarized sunglasses, it's a really cool thing to have because the polarized sunglasses are almost acting like a filter, so you can actually see through the water and you'll see what's underneath. So even if you're not looking for manatees, if you're a waterway and you want to look for some fish or something, polarized sunglasses are a really cool tool to have. You can also look out for manatee snout and a footprint. Now I put a picture of a footprint here because manatees don't have any feet, so how can they have a footprint? Well, it's actually a circular pattern on the top of the water that the manatee makes when it's swimming with its tail. So if you see something like that, very good indication that there is a manatee around. If you live in Florida, I put the FWC number on here as well. This is the number you would call to report a sick, injured, orphaned, or dead manatee. And we do provide signs, waterway cards, and boater packets as well. So if you do live in Florida or you live near waterway, you can contact us to obtain some of those signs as well. Another threat to manatees is entanglement in crab traps and monofilament fishing line. So as you can see in this picture, some manatees get their flippers very wrapped up with that line. Monofilament line can actually stay in the environment for over 400 years. So something that I discard today is going to stick around for that long. It's not something that's going to go away tomorrow. So the best thing you can really do is discard it in trash bins or those recycle bins here. So you want to make sure that you're not just throwing it into the waterway. The same goes for all trash. A lot of manatees that are found deceased actually have their stomach and their intestines filled with pieces of trash. So it's very, very important to not litter, and please pick up after yourself. Another threat manatees are facing are algae blooms. Those can be red tides, which usually occur in Southwest Florida. They occur naturally, but they are fueled by pollution in the water. Manatees, as you can see here on the slide, this is a manatee that got rescued because it was at risk of drowning. We also have blue-green algae blooms that can cover up the seagrasses that the manatees are eating. So this is another problem for manatees. They usually occur due to pollution in the waterway from fertilizers, pesticides, all the pollutions that people put into the waterways can affect manatees as well. And sometimes those effects are not even visible right away. It may take a couple of years until we actually realize that something is really, really wrong. And then last but not least, like I said, manatees do need that warm water. So for those manatees that don't find those warm water sites in the wintertime, they can suffer from what we call cold stress syndrome. So if you're looking at the manatee here on the bottom of the slide, it has all these white lesions all over its body. It's very skinny. This is what a cold stress manatee will look like. The problem is that a lot of the older power plants are being retired. They're going offline, meaning they are taken down. So if manatees use this source of warm water in the winter, many of them may be left out in the cold. So this is definitely a big concern. Also, natural springs, a lot of them are getting weaker due to overpumping of the groundwater. So we need to make really sure that those natural springs are protected for manatees to use them in the wintertime, because otherwise they can get really sick. And one thing I wanted to address, because a lot of people just really don't know much about it, is manatee harassment. This is a threat to manatees as well. A lot of people don't really mean any harm, but they do, for example, feed and water manatees. And this is really a thing we don't want to do because it habituates the animal to people. What do I mean by that is that the manatee will associate a person with food. It may also associate a motorboat with food if it gets fed or watered from a boat or from a hose. So manatees have been around Florida for about 45 million years. That's how long the fossil record actually goes back. I can assure you, the water hose hasn't been around for that long. So somehow manatees were able to survive before, and they will be able to survive without being fed or watered by people. They actually get most of the water that they need to survive from the vegetation they're eating. Their kidneys actually have the ability to filter the salt. So manatees don't need to drink as regularly as you and I would. It is against the law actually to feed, water, or otherwise harass a manatee. So what exactly do I mean by harassing a manatee? Pretty much anything that alters the behavior of a manatee. So if a mother is nursing her baby, or if a manatee is sleeping and I'm getting too close and that manatee swims away, I have just harassed the manatee. So all of that is against the law. If you do see a manatee, if you're out swimming or kayaking or scuba diving, the best thing to do is look at it from a distance. We call that passive observation. A lot of manatees are very, very curious, so they may actually come right up to you and actually come to check you out, and you don't have to touch them. Harassment can alter the manatee's behavior. It can separate mothers from their calves, and it can be fatal if manatees leave warm water sites and are being chased out into a cold waterway because they feel bothered. So again, best thing, if you see a manatee, look at it from a distance, take pictures of it, but don't get too close that you're annoying it. And last but not least, I wanted to tell you just a little bit about manatee rescue, rehabilitation, and release, because these are some of the activities that I'm allowed to do during my research as well. And a lot of people always wonder, well, how do we get a huge 2,000-pound animal out of the water when we rescue them? So I put a couple of pictures together for you here. The manatees are usually rescued with a specialized boat and a net. So the net is very, very large and it has a lead line on the bottom, so it's very heavy on the bottom, and then a float line, like these little white floats you see on the top. That's what's swimming on the top. And that's how the manatee gets scooped up and then it's lifted onto the boat. Manatees, since I said they're air-breathing mammals, they also don't crush under their own weight. So they can actually be transported in a transport truck, like a big U-Haul truck, you know, a little big box truck. That's where they are transported in for a couple of hours. They can be out of the water for quite a while. Then they're usually brought to a critical care facility. We have 4 of them here in Florida, and that's what you see in the picture on the top right-hand corner. This is a manatee undergoing treatment at Zoo Tampa at Lowry Park. So it's getting some blood drawn, they're taking its weight, they're taking all its vitals to try to see what's going on with it. And then manatees are usually released very close to where they were found. Manatees are very site-specific animals, meaning they have a very high site fidelity. You want to get them out somewhere very close to where they came from. You don't want to rescue a manatee in you know, the east coast of Florida and then you're putting it down on the west coast. That manatee wouldn't really know where to go. So those are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we release a manatee. We have to put it pretty close to where it was initially found and for it to be able to find its way back to where it was. All right, and with that, I'm at the end of my formal presentation. I'm definitely going to take questions from people right now. So I'm going to go look in the chat and see what kind of questions we are getting. And then I will try to answer as many of them as possible. So yeah. So I have one question here from Christine's kindergarten class asking, how do manatees protect themselves? So this is a really great question. Like I said, manatees don't have any natural predators. They have evolved without any predators, so they've never really learned how to defend themselves. Usually when manatees sense danger, they try to swim away very quickly. They usually swim at around 3 to 5 miles an hour, but in short bursts, they can go up to 20 miles an hour. It doesn't last for very long, but that's usually what they do. They will try to just quickly swim away. If a mother, for example, senses danger to her calf, she will get between the calf and the danger. So this is pretty much how manatees do protect themselves. All right, I have someone asking, how long do they live and how old was the manatee that lived the longest? Very good question. So manatees can get over 60 years old. Snooty the manatee was actually the longest living manatee. He lived to be 69 years old. And we only knew this because Snooty actually lived in captivity. So we knew his birth date. That's how we knew how old he can get. And unfortunately, he died during an accident. So that wasn't even a natural cause of death. So he could have potentially lived even longer than that. So to answer the question, we really have no clue. We do know that they can get over 60 years old. Unfortunately, right now, the average lifespan is only between 10 and 13 years of age, which that is really sad because we know they can live so long. And we do see that a lot of manatees die very young because of all the different threats that I just talked about in the presentation. But if they're left undisturbed, they can live a pretty long life. All right, this is a fun question here. Can you have them as pets? Manatees, like I just said, they do get pretty heavy, they're pretty large, and they need a very large habitat. So no, unfortunately, you cannot have a manatee as a pet. However, what I do recommend you can do, you can actually adopt a manatee from Save the Manatee Club. So if you go to our website, savethemanatee.org/adopt, you can actually adopt a real living manatee. So you don't have to take it home. We won't ship it to you, but you will symbolically adopt the manatee. You will get regular updates on the manatee. You get a biography of the manatee. You get a certificate of the manatee, and you get all that in the mail, and then you get regular updates about your manatee. So it's a really great way to support manatees and show your support for manatees, and basically, have a manatee at home without having to fill your bathtub to accommodate a manatee. All right, I have a question here from Mrs. Sorry if I pronounce this the wrong, Rebravity's class in San Bernardino, California. And she asked, what jobs would allow us to work with manatees? Marine biology, education, park rangers, those are all things. All right, so there are different jobs you can have to work with manatees. So obviously a background in biology or conservation, that's a good way to get started with manatees. There are volunteer opportunities, for example, here in Florida. There are internship opportunities, especially with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They do all the manatee rescues and the releases, so this is a good way to get started. You can also, for example, work at a state park here in Florida. There are some that have manatees, so you will be working indirectly with those manatees as well. Just a really quick background on how I got started with manatees. I actually do not have a formal background in biology or marine biology. I actually have a background in communication. So the way I got started was to do outreach, public awareness, and video production for Save the Manatee Club, which I still do. I do a lot of the educational videos and their live webcams, their public service announcement, all those kind of things. And then I transitioned a bit more into the research side of things. So sometimes you don't even really know where your background may take you to actually work with a manatee. All right. I have a question. How old does the baby need to be until it can be separated from mom? That is a good question. So usually babies stay with mom for about 1 to 2 years before they start a life on their own. During that time, they will learn how to find warm water sites, how to find travel routes, how to find food, and they will nurse. And that's something I didn't show in the picture, but the manatee baby will actually nurse from little mammary glands that are located behind the flipper of the mother manatee, so sort of in the armpit area. So the manatee mother can actually swim along and nurse the calf at the same time. They don't need to stop and like roll over or something. They can actually nurse the calf while they're swimming along. Also, I see that a lot of people are asking if manatees hibernate. Very good question. No, manatees do not hibernate. In the winter time, when it does get cold, they will migrate to these warm water sources, but they don't go to the warm water sources to hibernate. they will rest a lot more. So you won't see them as being as active as they are during the rest of the year. They will spend a lot of time sleeping and resting, but they don't traditionally hibernate, like, for example, you may know from like a bear or other mammals that sleep for the entire length of the winter. The manatees will come to the warm water sources. They will pretty much stay there for the winter time, usually between November and March, and then they will go back out and explore the waterways. But they don't hibernate in a traditional sense. Now, if you do come to Florida and you want to see manatees, the best time to visit is between the months of November and March, because that's when the manatees congregate at these big warm water aggregation sites. And also, maybe some of you have heard about it or not, we do have live webcams where you can actually see the manatees in the wintertime. So if you go to manatv.org, or you go, it's manatv.org, or you go to our website, you can actually watch them from home. So if you're located in the UK or Argentina or Mexico or Australia, you know, I know I have a lot of people here from out of the country, you can actually enjoy the manatees from home and watch them on our webcams as well. I have one more question here. How do they play with each other? So manatees are very playful creatures. They sometimes get together in groups of maybe 3, 4 or more animals, and they will sort of roll around. They will do headstands and tail stands, and, you know, grab each other with their flippers. So all those kind of things they do to play with each other. I see a lot of people are also asking if manatees do attack each other or if they are dangerous. Manatees are pretty much one of the most peaceful creatures on the planet. They do not attack each other, and they also don't attack anybody else. Since they have evolved with no natural predators, they really have never learned how to defend themselves or how to be aggressive. Manatees are sort of like this really chill, laid back animal. The only time when they can get quote unquote not aggressive but dangerous is if you are in a situation where you rescue a manatee and you have to pull it out of the water. They have very, very strong tails. So if a manatee rolls itself over on its back, it actually has the ability to touch its snout to its tail. And you don't want to be anywhere near that. Even if you're a trained biologist with a decade of experience, you don't want to be near that manatee. Also, if you see a manatee, you know, in a coastal waterway close to the beach, you really don't want to get close to that. You don't want to have your kids getting too close to that. These manatees are very peaceful, but they're very, very heavy and strong animals. So you want to keep that in mind. All right, let's see. I have time for one more question here. Do they travel in big groups, or do they generally stay on their own? So manatees do not form groups or herds like you may see in dolphins or whales. Again, that actually is because they don't have any natural predators. So they haven't evolved needing the protection of a herd. So you may see manatees in loose, small groups. They're usually solitary, but you may see them traveling in groups of maybe 2, 3, or 4 animals. The only time when you see a really large group is usually in the winter time, and that's because they congregate at these warm water aggregation sites because of a common habitat requirement, like the warm water. Now, the only long-lasting bond is really that between a mother and her calf. They will stay together for about 1 to 2 years, and you will see them traveling together. But other than that, they don't really form any big groups or families or herds or pods or anything like that. They also don't really have a leader structure. You don't have like one manatee in charge with everyone else following it. There's no hierarchy as such. They seem to all be the same. So you will not see a traditional family unit in a manatee. All right. I don't know if I have questions for time for another question. Not sure, but what I do want to do to wrap this all up is I want to encourage you guys to take a selfie with a manatee. So the way this is working is I'm going to pose here with my little stuffed manatee. If I can get her in the frame, we'll see if it works or not. And then we're going to stay here for about 30 seconds. And you can take a selfie as a memory that you attended our Skype in the classroom presentation, and you can put that on your social media and tag Skype in the classroom. You can share it with your friends and your family and basically tell everybody what you learned about our manatees today. And we hope that everyone had a good time today. And staying safe out there wherever you're from, and hope you have learned quite a bit about manatees today. And here is me and the manatee. All right, bye everybody. I hope everyone had fun today. Stay safe, and we hope to see you on more Skype in the classroom and spreading the word about manatees.